Broadcasting from Salisbury University campus, this is WSDL Ocean City, NPR News Talk 90.7. Putting Delmarva first. Stay tuned for Delmarva Today with your host, Don Rush.
It's called The Seven Rivers, a novel about a black family in a small waterfront town. Welcome to Delmarva Today. This is Don Rush. The novel follows 7 teenagers in a town along the Severn River outside of Annapolis. And the Sweetstones, an African-American family who live amidst a racially diverse community. It takes place in the late 1970s, early 80s, and revolves around the trials and tribulations of their daughter, Sherry. We have the author in the studio this morning, Cynthia Hammer. Welcome to the program.
Thank you very much. Thanks for having me.
So first of all, what inspired you to write this particular story about this young girl growing up? In many ways, the novel seemed very honest in terms of the kinds of things that she encountered.
Well, it's a depiction of my life growing up. When I was 9 years old, a young, well, not young, I was young, but an African-American writer, Miss Betty Baker, was my mentor, and I wouldn't know that she would be my mentor until like 30 years later. I don't want to age myself. So I picked up a book from the library, my first assignment. I pick up a book and it's called What is Black? And I read it so many times, and it was about everything that is black, that is beautiful. And I screamed, oh my God, oh my God. And my mother's like, what's wrong? Be quiet. Stop, making all that noise. I said, the author is black. She's black. And I could not believe that someone finally had related to me. And so fast forward, I pray that I meet her one day. And the long of the short is that I did. And I told her a story about my younger brother falling through the frozen Severn River, and which was a true story. And I saved his life at 12. He was 10. And she said, that's a book. Call it Iceberg. You need to write about it. And, fast forward, the Iceberg did very well. And I wrote a sequel. And that's how I birthed The Seven Rivers. And The Seven Rivers is now the 7 teenagers going from middle school, journeying into high school. And it's a story about, bullying. I was heavily bullied as a child to the point where I became a bully out of survival. You beat them, if you can't beat them, join them. And, we grew up in a time where we did tussle on the playground, and you really didn't go home and tell your mother. You just fought it out. You might have shook hands afterwards. It wasn't to the point where you felt like killing someone or, taking someone's life. We actually valued life. It didn't even come into your mind. However, you did go home with the emotional scars of being an outcast, or just the confusion of the day seemed overwhelming. Maybe I don't want to live another day. Just all the things that children you feel as a child emotionally as you're growing up, as you're trying to grow and navigate your way through your teenage years. So I write a lovely story about friendship, betrayal, making the right decisions, implementing God, because I believe for me, if it wasn't for God, I would not be here. Like, He was my saving grace as a child. So that's the inspiration behind the story, is me just being able to tell my story.
How much of it is autobiographical then?
Probably 99.9.
These things really happen, huh?
Yes, it's actually, there's a lot of truth to it. I do exaggerate a little in the haunted house. The haunted house story is true. For those who love mystery adventures, the haunted house story is a story I heard as a child when my grandmother was living. And my grandmother and my dad and my mom worked on a property that was very close to our home. It was like if you cut through about 1.5 miles through the woods, there was a huge mansion that sat on a hill, and it was haunted. And I won't give it away. Right. But I do believe.
as we often do, right? Well, you open the novel, actually a few chapters in, about this party on the beach with Sherry's friend Cara. You seem to be setting up all these relationships. Tell me a little bit about that party and how those characters relate.
Okay, so what I liked about literature growing up is that I always liked. I'm a huge Shakespeare fan, and I love Macbeth. I love the way the author sets up the reader to understand that art will unfold if it's good, if it's written well. If you read it again, almost like the Bible, if you read it again and again and again, it opens up to more than it was the first time you read it. So when I write, I try to make it so that it has meaning, and then it'll have meaning again and again. So the chapter is called The Hustle. And the hustle to me is a young girl who has this huge birthday party, and she tries to position herself to be she's the new kid at school, but she positions herself to be the most popular. And the hustle is that she's already a spoiled child who has everything, but she's a very manipulative child. And so she invites the whole class, the fifth grade class, to a birthday party and excludes the competition. So then I put in, and then she gets an array of gifts, like the driveway lines up and the cars are stopping and they're coming with bags of this, and that. She has all these beautiful gift bags coming to her. And what she doesn't realize, what Sherry realizes through the years and in that moment, that the young girl really doesn't care for any of them. And that was truth. I did have a really close friend who was my saving grace. It was only because of her friendship that I was not harmed. I finally was no longer bullied when she befriended me. And I didn't have a problem being her friend. In all of the trials and tribulations of being her friend, because it's a high price to pay. For the friendship, but I was willing to risk the high price so I'd no longer be bullied. So I was, and I did everything I wasn't supposed to do, and I was okay with that because it was better then, and I think a lot of kids can relate to that. So, but the hustle, the music comes on, because back then they had the Disco Inferno, and the hottest dance was the hustle.
Right.
So I can recall as the child that we bonded over the hustle, the literal song of the hustle. And when everyone lined up at the slumber party to dance, I couldn't dance. So not all black people can dance. So I could not dance, and neither could she. And that was our bond, that we fumbled in that moment of vulnerability and also bonded. And stepped away from the party and really bonded. And that birthed our friendship. But when I call the chapter The Hustle, it's really the young person at that young age knew how to move people across the board. I think kids can be very manipulative if they're not guided properly. And the thing about the main character was neglected, so she kind of navigated her own way as an adult and got to do whatever she wanted to do. And her decisions wasn't always the best. And I followed greatly along because my parents were very strict. And at her house, it wasn't as strict, and I got to see how other people live. Like, take for instance, like a doorbell. Like, we didn't have a doorbell. We had a screen door that flapped half the time. It was off, half the time it was on. But when I rang her doorbell and you could hear that beautiful sound, I was like, it opened a whole nother world. And so I tried to show each teenager without giving the reader like too much. You want to allow a person to use their imagination, but through a series of circumstances, you get to understand their emotional and mental and just their physical and just their mindset. And I want the reader to relate to it. I try not to guide the reader with my perspective. I use a series of circumstances because we all have a different perspective.
Right.
And so that is the purpose of the Seven Rivers. And a lot of people have gravitated to that, even adults, because it takes you back to a time when, it was fun to play outdoors, and you actually played outside. We actually have, creek jumping, rock throwing. As boring as it sounds, it was fun. It was amazing because you were bonding, and we weren't on our cell phones. And I'm not knocking the cell phone era, but we've raised our children on a cell phone. And for me, I believe the understanding of what I know today comes from the ability to run and play outside. I think many people relate to being outdoors.
There's also a character, in some ways, I think, symbolizes sort of the white community around her, which is Carl. Tell me a little bit about him. And I mean, on the one hand, he certainly befriends her, but on the other hand, she comes to realize in the end, of course, that he actually despises her.
Yes. And I never really, it wasn't until I wrote the story that I said, darn, there was a lot of there's a lot of things that I stuffed to survive. And I believe that the time to tell the story was just the time to tell it. And I was trying to write about how awesome my childhood was. But as I was writing, I thought, wow, this stuff happened. Let me just put it on paper and see what comes to the surface. And Carl, we were the best of friends growing up, and so I write the loveliness. But I was a tomboy. I was very small, and I was very fast, and I was very good at sports. The only reason I didn't excel at sports is my parents couldn't afford to drive me back and forth. If I could walk to get there, and my brother did. He walked to his basketball practices, and when the neighborhood people who were taking their kids saw him, he would hitch a ride to his high school. He went on to play for the Harlem Globetrotters. What I'm saying is he was willing to walk.
Right.
My parents was not taking that 25-mile drive. And so, because they were working, so I can't put it on them. But so I did not pursue, I was very good in a lot of sports, but I didn't pursue that. So what I'm saying is I was very athletic, and he was not. And he was to an extent, but he wasn't like, I was overly athletic because I had 4 brothers. And so there was some resentment there and jealousy, which I did not realize, because I beat him at everything. But that was just the era. If you practice long enough, if you swim against the kids that I swam against who swam like fish, like they were very, very athletic, I was the worst of them. But to be around people that make you better, I would be the best to the average. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. So that's just how it was. And he was just not.
Not there.
No, and that was okay. But it bothered him, obviously. So I found myself that day trapped on that cliff, and I don't want to give it away.
Sure.
And it really opened my eyes. It terrified me, but it opened my eyes. And it hurt as well. And we didn't speak for the longest time. And also, growing up in that era, people always question, well, why are you friends with her? Or why are you friends with him? That was the parents in the children's ear asking, why are you friends with a black person? Always questioning, and they always defended with, oh, you don't know them, or if you play with them, you're this and that, you're in trouble. And so sometimes your friendship would just end without knowing it, and then you were friends again on the kickball field, and then it would end again, and then pretty soon the kid would make their own decisions, and they didn't care, and it was a constantly convincing their parents that this family was okay. And eventually, obviously, somebody convinced some way it worked out that we weren't a threat, and it shouldn't have been even an issue. But you know the era, and it's unfortunate because it's not that far 70s and 80s. You'd think we'd had come a little further. Anyway, so Carl was under pressure as well to not have an African American friend, because his mother was trying to be friends with someone that was very popular in the neighborhood. So he has so to put that kind of pressure on the kid. So I write it in a story, and it was good that you caught that, actually.
Well, you talk about that. There's a quote or from the book talking about Sherry was too black for white kids and too white for black kids, tired of being picked on. It's like she's walking along this edge in which she doesn't belong in either one. I mean, obviously, maybe she does. I don't know.
Yeah. I tell you, just hearing you say that, I'm so grateful to God, because when I wrote Iceberg, I really had to pause for a minute and say, wow, we survived all that. When my brother, I get a little misty, because there was a lot of, this is not a story about bashing white people or being a victim. There was a lot of white people that jumped in front of us. I get a little misty.
All right.
Because in the era we're living in now, we're so separate and divided. But there were a lot of people that took up for us a lot. And I can remember a story that a young white we were oh, I didn't think I was going to get misty. Excuse me.
It's all right.
Let
Go
me pull it
ahead.
together. Because you know what I'm saying. Not everyone's racist. Let's just come out and say it. So anyway, there was a lot of people that did that for us. Let me just say that. So could you remind me of the question again?
Sure. So she was walking this line because on the one
okay.
hand, two black for the white community
Yes.
and two white for the black community.
Yes. So okay, so every day, I think every day riding my school bus, we were picked on until I got to high school. Until I got on, and the only reason I got on the bus, another bus, was my mother was saying that it was unsafe for us to ride with the other neighborhood school bus, and I finally got to ride the bus with the kids I played with all summer. But that was only because we had endured so much that it was a fight that it was ugly, and it was bloody, and it was cruel. But they threw me off the bus because I fought. I was tired, and I fought like my life depended on it. And they finally got the message that it wasn't safe for my brother and I to ride the school bus anymore because my older brothers had moved on, and it was just me and my younger brother. So so then I get to high school, and all of my white friends that speak to me, the black people see that, and they didn't like it. So I was bullied by black kids for knowing white kids. So pretty much I hated high school. I have to say I did. I hated it. And I have to say on my tears, because I really think it's about these kids go through so much. And when I think back, I was like, wow, I'm still here. And the tears are for thank you, God. Thank you, God. Now I'm writing about it. So basically, I'm getting the last laugh. But art does imitate life. And the depth of the fact that God carried me through all that, I hadn't realized how in depth that kind of, it's a form of abuse that you have to endure just to go to school and get an education. And that's why I wrote the books, because kids are going through this just to go to school, and it's your God-given right to get an education, and it's not my problem or other kids' problem that the parents aren't raising their children. It's not. You know, if a kid has to abuse another kid just to feel okay about himself, something is wrong. And yes, it's the parents' fault. It's not the teacher's job, but that's a whole nother.
Right.
That's a whole nother show, right?
Well, let me ask you this, because it turned to the parents, because one of the scenes, I imagine this actually, if I were seeing it on film, and I don't think it would come across as much. You talk about Red and the father and beating Maurice for some transgression, right?
Right.
And he said, and you write this, that evening Red had unleashed all of his pain from childhood to adult failures, hate, and anything he lacked, he poured into Maurice.
Yeah.
And it reminds me, in fact, of a number of African American characters I've read and seen. What about that? It's as if he's all this pent up frustration then suddenly is unleashed on Maurice, who's not responsible for it at all.
Yes. Well, and let's be clear. It's not just an African American dad. It can be a white dad.
Right.
It can be a Hispanic dad. It can be a Japanese dad. You know, a lot of times our parents grew up very rough. You know, my dad had a lot of kids by the time he was 26. So I get why he went through his difficulties, because that's a lot to take on with the world already against you. And as an African American man, he couldn't speak up to his boss because he needed that income and he had mouths to feed. And I'm not saying it was right, but he had his own reasons, his own issues, like many of my the kids that I grew up with. We all heard each other's stories, and it's for them it's their story, it's still their story to tell, but it was no different. They, you know, I think in that era there was you kept a lot of things in, and so But what I did understand that day from knowing my father's story is that he had a rough childhood. And it just seemed like it never was about his kids. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So that day, it was just, it was horrific. And Maurice, my brother says to this day that he deliberately fell, so he would, like he was like dead, so he would stop, and so that's what he did. And so, but the pain from that brings into well wishes to run away. It
Right.
rolls into that. So I would say this, that I just believe that there's no excuse for, it's no excuse to still blame your parent for how they parented you, because as an adult you have a choice. And there's no excuse for a parent to say that we did the best we could. You did what you wanted to do. Now, some people look at it different, but I believe my parents did what they wanted to do. And I don't hold any resentment against them. They're lovely and wonderful people, but I break the cycle with the choices that I make. And so what I say in the book, I hope people get, I don't say it like that. I say it through circumstances, that we have our own choices. And I was talking to a friend last night that still have issues with their parents. If you make your own choices, we can no longer blame someone. My mother made me do this, or my dad made me. You're 40.
Right.
So in that situation, I think that there's a lot of frustration, but that takes us in. I'm not one of those, I believe in the black fight, but I'm not one of those people that stand out politically, because I do it in a different way. And what I believe, and I believe in all people. I just don't believe in, because I'm African American, that I have to stand with all black causes.
Right.
I stand with the cause that I believe in. So when you ask me about the African American father, I can only answer that I believe anyone can have issues that they unresolved, that'll resonate into their everyday life.
Her mother, Sadie,
Mm-hmm.
it's a slightly different approach. You quote her saying that all of her children were creative and smart. She was so proud of them, often boasting to her clients about their grades, shattering the illusion of what whites thought black children could accomplish. Some were jealous, thinking their children should be doing better. After all, they had more than the stones, or at least they thought so. Much different feel to the mother there.
Yes. My mother did raise us. She worked as a housekeeper, now that in itself, I didn't realize that till I wrote my first novel, that I had to go and to work and clean with her. To the kids I went to school with, how embarrassing is that as a kid? Now, I went on to realize that I got my first house out of writing a letter to the bank on why I would be a great homeowner, and it brought them to tears. So that's a whole nother story.
Right.
But what I was trying to say, I have a work ethic. That I have a work ethic because it started when I was a kid. So what my mother did was she taught me a trade at a teenager. I had my own business when I was like 16. She taught me a trade, but I didn't want to be like my mom. There's nothing wrong with that. Parents will take you into what they know, and you could always feel something else calling you. So my mom just, she's very humble, and she was a helper. She didn't mind helping you. She was very humble, but she was not educated. As far as having many options, but people loved her, and she would take the shirt off of her back, and my dad would too as well. I mean, they both are moral people. They believe that you pay your bills on time. I don't pay anything late. My dad would say, if you don't pay the electric bill on time, the police will come. So my bills were late. I'd be looking out the door. That's how naive I was. So I didn't mean to stop. Excuse me. So I pay my bills on time. So they did some things right. So, but my mom was, she punished you, but she didn't punish you like publicly. She would pull you aside, and she didn't have to tell you twice. But she could do that with love. But her threat was, I'm going to tell your father. Well, that's all we needed to hear. Yeah.
And she has a pride in her children.
Yes.
I mean, that's almost a pushback from the expectations and the world, the white world outside.
Yes, yes. And you know, she loved all of the kids that I mentioned. She read them like a book. She knew their pain. After all, she worked in some of their households. So she knew their pain. Now she didn't share that with me. I didn't know their pain until we got to be teenagers and we were talking about it. But she saw from behind the scenes. So she always had a special love for each one of them. They loved seeing her, and she treated them like they were her son or daughter. And I believe now is because she knew what they were enduring. And but she raised us that, you know, we're no better than anyone, and nobody's better, no better than us. And it made it a lot easier. You know, there were times when I didn't realize the diversity. You know, I don't know if it was the denial or the fun or the love. I'm going to lean more on the denial.
Well, I don't think we, as children, I don't think we realize what the world looks like around us, what it is. I mean, I can remember thinking back that in Kentucky in 1954, I went to school. Well, the odds are I went to a segregated school, but as a child, I didn't know what was going on, right? And
Right.
isn't that how we are?
Yeah, I believe the innocence is what is your survival tool. Exactly. You're really not focused on that. I mean, you can feel that something's not right. I could go into a room and feel something is not right and not put my finger on it. And that underlying pull on your security can bring into insecurity and bring you the need to be approved of. Because no one said to me, there was a few teachers, but no one said to me, that a girl, go get him. I had to build my own muscle and carry my own cleats. And I'm not saying that as a victim. I've overcome that. But I realized in my writing that gave voice. I was painfully shy as a child. Sometimes I stuttered. I would hide. If you walked in the room, I would hide. You know, I did. Well, not today.
Not today, but
not
yes.
today.
Right.
But I had to overcome those things. And that was because of no one told me my value as a kid. No one did. I mean, there was a few teachers that really paid attention, but when you have a class of 30, when you feel neglected and abused, you need to be stroked a lot to
Right.
healing. And they didn't have it, but they didn't insult you. But they didn't have the time, I guess you could say, to give that constant focus to just one child that was needed. But they did. I like a lot of my teachers. Some were horrifying, and but I understand today that it's important for a kid to know their value. And I'm not a big fan of a kid having a birthday party and everyone should get a gift. No, it's that child's day, and you need to raise your kid to know that it's their child's day and it's not about you. But that's another show, right?
Well, let me ask you this. So we won't give away the ending of the book, but I'm curious about, does Sherry eventually outgrow, and what you at least perceive down the future in terms of her future, does she outgrow the kind of bully that she's become, or is there a hint at the end? I mean, where is she at that moment that we kind of leave her?
Yeah, I don't want to give it away. So I would say that she has some tough decisions.
Right.
And she chooses the right thing. She chooses the right thing. And sometimes the right thing can be painful and it can leave you alone for a moment. Because with kids, it feels like the right thing could be an eternity. And what if this happens? And what if that happens? But you have to always lean to good. Good always outweighs evil. It wins every time.
So you envision her as overcoming this, what she's become in high school as a bully.
Yes. Yeah, I do. And I navigate to how and why.
Right.
I don't leave the young reader or the adult reader without an understanding of that we all go through this. We all go through difficult times, but we do come out on the other side. And you have to go through. Part of life is going through. See, the crushing, I call it being crushed. You know, God will crush you in areas to grow you. And I was saying the other night, quoting the Bible, it's the tear and the wheat. When you come up, the wheat, it doesn't come up without the tear. So all that pain and agony, as a child, is a purpose. but it doesn't feel like it. And the only thing that kept me going was I always thought that I would be somebody. And whatever that somebody is, but I always felt it. And I always felt that God was saying, come on, you can do it. And I'd be like, God, just take me now. Because it was too much to bear. And so if I felt that way, I can only imagine what these young kids are going through. And so, I really feel for them. I have a lot of empathy for the kids, and I don't say this to think that it's going to be any easier, but I do believe that everyone has a purpose. That's true. Everyone has a purpose, and if you can I'm not saying that all the things that come in your life that's horrifying should, because a lot of times people come into your life that shouldn't be there, and they harm you, and they shouldn't have. It's just the key to how you survive it, how you make it through.
Before we wrap up, you set this in a very small town in Maryland, I guess it is. Tell me a little bit about this small town that you have this events occurring, and why that small town.
Okay, so today it's not so small. I left out the name of the town because it's outside of Annapolis, and it's along the Severn River. And there's many towns along the Severn River. But the Severn River, I put the Seven Rivers because it's the seven teenagers, how they intertwine and
right.
Their rivers and their life, the ebbs and flow of their mental and emotional state. So the town that I grew up in was small, and but living on the waterfront, it gave you an array of adventures, and I leave that out because I want the reader to picture their own town. Because a lot of people say to me, well, this reminds me of how I grew up. The sign that says no trespassing is the very place we wanted to go. And, we were chased off of properties and we outran the dogs. I write this awesome tale in my first novel and a little bit in my second of we all have our pets, our lovely, friendly pets, and we always have that street that you want to hear of that chain. You hear that chain, you pick up an extra speed, because he's crossing yards and he's on your trail. So a lot of people can relate to the small town living, and so I leave it out deliberately, and I changed it,
right.
for the people who, a lot of people are very happy about it, a lot, but I always also want the reader to imagine how they grew up. So this small town outside of Annapolis is a lovely place to live, and I think Maryland is absolutely beautiful. So a shout out to Maryland. Maryland is beautiful. I think it's one of the top 10 places to live, for sure.
You now live in California?
I do live
in Los
California.
Angeles. Los Angeles.
I do. I live in Los Angeles, and we're with the Lost Angels. And I do have a summer place in Ocean City. So I come back and get my stability and my blue crab.
There you go. Well, we've been speaking with Cynthia Hammer. She's an author of a novel, The Seven Rivers, about 7 teenagers in a town along the Severn River outside of Annapolis, I guess finding their way, as it were. I appreciate you stopping by and chatting with us.
Thank you so much.
This has been Delmarva Today. I'm Don Rush. Thanks for listening.
Thank you for watching Delmarva Today, a production of Delmarva Public Radio. Production and audio engineering by Chris Rank. Hosted by Don Rush. For podcasts, visit delmarvapublicradio.net or subscribe to the Delmarva Today podcast on iTunes. Delmarva Today can now be seen on Pack 14.